Hello, my name's Christian, and let's draw something interesting. One of the things that you need to worry about when you're drawing a fantasy map is how you represent different types of terrain. After you've put down your big important features like your coastline and your mountains, maybe your rivers, you can think about, how do I make grasslands? How do I make forests? Today I want to look at deserts, and I want to show you a method that I use to make a desert that I came up with after searching around, looking at satellite photos, looking at the way other people drew deserts. And it's this sort of dune sea, a lot like the Saharan parts or like the empty quarter of Saudi Arabia, with these big dunes and ergs in between, and these lines of sort of shifting sands, this sort of look. So I want to take you through that process of how I create a desert. First of all, a note about this desert: this is sort of a rain shadow desert, which is fairly obvious. If you look at the terrain around it, you can see these big mountains here are stopping all the rain from crossing over and dropping precipitation over here. So you have shadow of dryness behind the mountains, making what's called a rain shadow desert, like the Taklamakan Desert in the Central Asia region, surrounded by big mountains on all sides. And this little river coming down here to this little inland sea, this is sort of an endorheic basin, meaning there's no outflow to the ocean. So the implication would be, somebody casually looking at this would be a very salty sea, perhaps, especially if it's a sea that's been there for a long time. Basically, river flowing in and just evaporation happening. This might be a saltier sea than the ocean, which comes in fairly close on the other side of these mountains. So how do we achieve this sort of look in keeping with the isometric perspective look of the mountains and all the other features here? So I'm going to take a color here that's a dark reddish brown. I could use black, but in this map I kind of like the idea of using an ink color that was in keeping with the color of the feature itself. So you can see how the mountains are black here and gray, and the sand dunes here have this sort of dark brownish look. So that's the color I've chosen. I'm just going to draw on an empty layer using my basic tech pen with a line that kind of goes from single pixel wide, and I push heavier and I can get it to about 7 or 8 pixels wide if I push really hard. The way we draw these dunes, and that's going to be the first feature that I'm going to draw, is you start off with a line that's almost horizontal and then swings around, comes down, and just like with the mountains, I'm going to have the line kind of peter out like that. Line that's almost horizontal for a bit, swings around, and comes on down. And basically what we're kind of trying to draw is sort of an isometric view of a dune that, if we looked at it from top down, the dune would be a crescent dune shaped like this, where the wind is coming from this direction, driving the sand up, and you get this break, and the sand tumbles down the backside, and the backside tends to be steeper than the front side. That's what we're drawing from a top-down perspective, but we're drawing it isometric from the side-on view. So that's why we need to have this variation in shape, where the backside of the dune looks mostly straight, and then the front side of the dune comes down like that. I don't always get it quite right, but it's okay. You can have your dunes shaped a little differently than each other. You can have some dunes nice and small, some dunes bigger. And the key here is that the sharpest part of the curve is right here, where their break happens. This is preserving the illusion of the isometric view. to make it look like a three-dimensional kind of thing. So we get some dunes down. Now, when it comes to making these dunes look three-dimensional, kind of popping up towards us, with the ink work, I could do something like this, like on one of my mountains, where I take the dune and I draw some lines coming off of it showing the darker sort of backside of the dune. And that works. That's one way to do it. And I've done that on maps before. However, these days, the look that I go for is sort of a flowy kind of look with lots of parallel curving lines when it comes to the desert. So my solution for that was to have parallel sort of contour lines coming off of the face of the dune, showing where it's steepest by having more lines there and having it kind of peter out like that. It's a personal preference. It's just however you want it to look. But I'm going to throw down some lines here, and if, get a little overzealous, basically you want the eye to be able to sort of see the line of the dune coming down like this. And so you're drawing a contour that's going to sort of be in line with that invisible line that your eye is drawing as it comes down. Like that. And do a little bit of touch up here and there to get rid of some of the extra line. So we're throwing down some dunes. Now, how do we get that shifting sands kind of look? Well, I have a brush that I call my stipple brush. It's a brush that does a series of dots for me. And as you can see with the Apple Pencil here, I'm perfectly capable of doing a series of dots, but it's a lot of tapping and it can be a little hard on your wrist. So I go with this brush I call stipple here. I can show you the attributes of it. It's just a pure white grain with a circular shape, but the dynamics have everything, the size shrunk to the very bottom, so that all that happens with this brush is that it comes out as a string of dots. And I can adjust the spacing of the dots in Procreate here. Right now I've got it set at right around 70%. If I go smaller, the dots are almost fully connected in a line. If I go a lot bigger, I can have dots much more spaced out, but where I like it, right around 70% or so that the line kind of comes out like that. And what I'm going to do here is I want a look that suggests lines of small dunes, like flowing lines of sand. So I'm just going to kind of come and let my hand wander and maybe go over the line a couple times with my stipple brush, because the dots will fall in a slightly different spot each time. And I'm going to come in here and have this line of flowing sand kind of flow along like that to give this illusion more of an effect. I have maybe lines coming off of it like this, and this line coming out like that. I'm just sort of letting it wander where it will. If I make a little, make it look a little ugly, I can touch it up a little bit. And I'm putting a lot of little parallels in here, so I'll have like a parallel, something flowing along like this. I'm going to leave the top of the dune relatively clear of ink marks because I want to highlight that, but I'm coming off of the dune with my flowing lines of sand and just having them flow along wherever they kind of want to go, like this. And again, maybe coming off of this like this a little bit. I'm going to try to have these little lines of sand not interfere with each other, not directly intersect with each other, but sort of flow in between. I'm letting the features that I put down guide me where I want the rest of the features to come. I can put some little contours in like that. Now, some of these deserts, I might choose to have like the overall direction of the lines be like everything should kind of go like this, in this direction. And so what I'll try to do is have I'll lay down some like master flow lines that kind of flow along, and then I'll have my lesser lines kind of key off of those, and my dune lines kind of blend into those until I'm creating this sort of look with these shifting, flowing sands. That's the idea anyway. It's an idiosyncratic thing. It's just the way I like to do it. There are lots of different ways to do it. If you practice doing this sort of thing, you'll come up with your own way that looks right to you. And I've gotten some good responses from people who like this sort of look to a desert. You can fill in lots of little details here and there, but you don't have to fill them in quite as densely as I did down here. I basically filled every available spot with those flowing sands. Up here, I'm kind of trying to show how you don't have to fill every little spot. You can have a few lines here and there, and you can get a lot of the same effect without having every square inch with a flowing line of sand in it. So once you get some dunes down, once you get some flowing lines of sand down in a way that you like, for some reason I kind of like these little swirls that almost look like a whirlpool of sand. I like to have those from time to time, place to place. I'm not sure they actually make sense in terms of a desert, but they kind of look nice from a representational point of view, from an illustration point of view. So I kind of like the way they look. Once you've got that stuff down, you can get some coloring, some highlight, and some shadow in there. So for coloring, I'll come in here and pick a nice sort of vibrant yellow or orange color here, and I'm going to go to my undercolor layer, and I'm going to pick a brush, this noisy brush here. The brush size, the brush itself looks about like that, and we've got a sort of a middle opacity here, and so I'm just going to cover over the sort of dirty vegetation, grungy look with sort of a light coating of this oranginess to give it some sandy underneath these features that I've drawn with the inks. So get some color going here. And it's not fully opaque, so we're getting some of the noise of the bottom showing through, which is fine. So get some patchy, orangey color down like that. And a good way to make a sandy look, now that we've got that color down, is to pick a nice super bright white yellow and sort of go on top. Oh, that's a little heavy. Go on top of the orange with the bright whitish yellow, and we'll get even more of a sort of golden sandy look to the color. And again, there's lots of ways to do the color. People have different methods, but there's some quick color. Now let's talk about shadow and highlight. I'm going to go to pure black. I'm going to go to a layer, shadow layer that I have set to multiply mode. It's always good. And I'm going to go to my shading brush, same shading brush I used on these mountains here. And where am I going to shade? Once again, shading on the side of the dune that's away from the light. So where these contour lines are here, and then maybe a little bit of shade on some of these flowing sand lines, sort of showing that they are really small dunes. So I'm giving a little bit of shade around where in between some of these, just on the back side, away from the light. And what I'm trying to do here is really get that illusion of three-dimensionality sort of popping out, which is what's sort of so pleasing to the eye when people look at a map that's got that isometric look to it, is getting that look that makes it look like the feature is popping out of the map towards you in a way. So getting some shadow down here, using a fairly light touch, but letting it build up in spots. All right, and now that we have some shadows, we can throw some highlights in. Just, once again, light coming from this direction, so we're casting little shadows with these dunes. Highlights will go to pure white and go to the highlight layer, which again is set on add, which is also called linear dodge. You could do this in screen mode as well, but I just happen to like the way add looks. And using the same brush, same shading brush, I'm going to give the tops of the dunes a lot of attention, letting those be nice and bright where the sun is hitting them. So wherever the tops of the dunes are, that might be even a little too bright, but that's okay. The cool thing about shadow and highlight on separate layers is that they apply to the color that you have underneath. So you've already got the color laid down. And then wherever I had a shadow down on these little dunes, I'll throw a highlight on the other side of the line. So wherever these little shadows are, throw a little highlight on the other side. And as soon as you start to do that, you get a real popping out look where it really seems to be sort of coming towards the viewer. I'm not doing this quite as obsessively or carefully as I normally would, but in some ways that's good, so it goes a little faster. So wherever there's a shadow, I'm kind of looking for the shadow, and I'm going to find the other side of the line from where I put the shadow, and I put that little highlight there. So there's a way to make a desert with shifting sands, with dunes, shadows and highlights, colors, and you can fill in a whole terrain area with a desert like that. And then you can, you've got your highlights down already, you've got your color down already. You can always come in and, give yourself another little detail here or there. I do big regions like this while I'm, watching a TV show or listening to a podcast, listening to an audiobook. I can just kind of zone out and just draw and draw and draw, following these sort of principles, and while paying attention to something else that's interesting. So thanks for watching, and this is just the way I do deserts these days, and experiment with it and come up with your own method that satisfies you, that looks good, and that you like. Thank you.